preparation for our exhortation this morning, our speaker has asked that we read from Numbers 14, 1 through 9. Numbers 14, starting at verse 1. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid." And so with that, we will have our exhortation given by our brother Dan Richard, entitled "A Servant's Heart." Brother Dan.
Everybody? So this exhortation is mostly to myself. I would call for volunteers of who's got the best servant's heart here, but that might be a little embarrassing. So we'll give it a go, and I think you'll like what you see, I hope. Whoops. Hold on. Oh, I blew it. I wanted to say Happy Mother's Day to everybody, all the mothers, all the women. First, and then the next one was to the special mother. So I found that picture. I had to tell you, I had a hard time finding a picture of my mom by herself. I actually couldn't find one, so I better talk to my sister and get a few of those pictures. So that was a good one. And Dad is always photogenic as usual. So maybe you've heard a story about starfish. Most of you probably have. The story is that there's a big storm and all these starfish come ashore. And actually, it's a true story. It happens. So the starfish come ashore and they all die because they can't get back to sea. So the way the story goes is, I guess a young boy goes out there and he starts picking them up and throwing them in the sea because then they'll live and they can't get there themselves. So some old person's watching or some other person's watching them and they say, "You're wasting your time because there's thousands of these and you can't do anything. You know, they're all going to die anyway. What does it matter?" So the young person continues and just picks one up. And as he picks it up, he says, "Well, it mattered to that one." So for each one he helped, it made a difference. It saved a life. Can't save everybody. We only got 24/7 in our lives, but we can certainly make a difference in the lives that we lead. You've also heard the story about young man who carries his brother, and he says, he's not heavy, he's my brother. So some of us have maybe experienced that more than others, but when we serve others, we serve God. So, how can I help you? You recognize that picture? Some of you do, probably the older ones here. If you're younger, you don't know him. On the left is Brother Ray Lieball. These were members of our church for many years. It's not? Oh, no. I blew it. Oh. I'm looking for Ray Lieball. I went looking for Ray Lieball. I said, that looks like him. And I looked in Gene's Facebook, and I thought I had him. Well, the story's about Ray Lieball. So row for two so far. So Ray Lieball was, in my mind, always an old brother. I don't know what he was when he was young, but he was always old. And he was always helpful. So he was a quiet brother. He didn't say much, and you didn't hear anything from him hardly at all. But he helped a lot. And at this church, he built the doorway that connected these two buildings, our back building, this one. So when we moved here, it was a separate building. The pastor lived in the back there with his family, and we had the church here. And he just said, well, let's just put this through here. It'll be more convenient. So he built it, and he was very handy. And I wouldn't know how to do that. So we'll pretend that that's Ray. He built the baptismal too? Okay, well, he did a lot of things. And it was always in a quiet way. So I think that's maybe the lesson. Now, that one I got right. Brian, you watching? If Brian is in the back and can see that, the reason I'm showing Brian is last week we had a little leak again in our basement. Again, we had a leak. About a 1/4 inch of water down there. Now, nobody here knows that, do they? And you don't know it because Brian was here and they were doing their violin lessons early, and Brian cleaned it up and fixed it. I thought that was pretty amazing. Not only did he fix it, he didn't go and blab about himself. He fixed it and did a nice job. So that's kind of what the heart of a servant's all about, is doing things to help others. Here's a couple. Sue is always helpful. But Lizette did something special last week. I don't think she's here today, is she? Maybe she's in the back. She's in the back? Well, Lizette, this is your time, because last week the memorials were not ready in the morning, and it was like 2 minutes to 10, and I said, oh, we need help with the memorials, and she just jumped right in and did it. And I know a lot of you do the same thing. It's not just one person, but she did a great job, and it was very helpful, and she didn't need any applause, so I thought that was a great thing. So one of our hymns goes like this. It says, brother, sister, let me serve you, let us serve you, let me be as Christ to you, pray that I may have the grace to let me be your servant too. And that's a true thing. We all want to serve one another. In the Bible, so we'll start looking at some Bible examples. You know who this is, right? Not Charlton Heston. No, it's Moses. It's got to be Moses with the 10 Commandments. Well, Moses, he's called a servant. And 52 times in the Bible, he's identified as Moses the servant. He's actually the second most in the Bible. I thought he'd be the first one, but he's actually the second. So there's some different passages. Here's one. It says, God sent Moses his servant and Aaron whom he had chosen. So there's just many passages like that where he's described specifically as his servant. Another one, Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house. So it's nice to be recognized as a servant by God. Another one, you know who that is? David. This one didn't come from Facebook. So I think we can just say this is David. So yes, David the servant. He's 125 times in the Bible, so he is number one of all. It's kind of interesting. God calls him a servant. So God says, I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to David my servant. And also, but I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Isaiah. Now, one prophet, well, just to set this up, many prophets God called, they were shy or didn't feel like they were up to the task, right? You think about Moses, you think about Jeremiah, they said send somebody else. The exception is this one prophet, who is? No, Isaiah. Isaiah is correct. So Samuel was a willing participant, but Isaiah actually said this. He said, "Here am I, send me." So it's in, I think, Isaiah 6, where God says, whom shall we send? And he says, here I am, send me. It's a great response. So that's kind of a goal for each of us, that whatever the task is, that we're the first one to volunteer. So if it's Men's Sunday, if it's, whatever it is to do, that we're out there volunteering, we want to help. Now, Caleb is different. So here's where we're going to do a little Bible study. So just brief, but the verse in Numbers says, because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Numbers 14. I'm pretty sure that is Caleb there. I'm getting better now as we're going here. I gotta fix that Ray one though. That was just embarrassing. It looked just like Ray. It looked like he would look if he was young. All right. So how is Caleb's spirit different? Yep. Here's a picture of Caleb as someone imagines him. So let's open our Bibles, if you don't mind. Open your Bibles to Numbers 13. We could look at a lot of different servants in the Bible. One that I was thinking especially was Abraham's servant who went to look for the wife for Isaac. He just did everything right. He was a great example of being a servant, of honoring his master, doing exactly what he was told to, and he was just, all about serving his master. He was a great example. But this one is Caleb. So start in Numbers 13, verse 26. And so the whole story is Moses sends the 12 guys into the promised land. He says, check it out, look at it all and let us know what it's all about. So they name them there. They all come back and they have a split vote. So 10 of them say, well, yeah, it's a nice place, but there's no way, okay? These guys are huge. They're like twice as big as us. The buildings are huge. It's a nice place, yeah, but there's no way we can take it. They're going to wipe us out. But 2 of them didn't say that. So one is Caleb. So pick it up here in Numbers 13:26. They proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word of them unto all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. So like that picture before, they actually did bring fruit back to show them. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. These are the giants. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. So basically, the whole land's full, they say. Yeah, it's a great land, but it's full of people, and they're big and strong and defensive, and, there's just no way we're going to take this. But, verse 30, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it. And this is like a defining moment for Caleb. I mean, he takes action, and he's standing up against everybody. So you got the 10 leaders over on one side all saying one thing, and probably everybody else is going, yeah. There's no way we can do it. We're scared to death. We don't know how to fight anyway. And then Caleb, against everything, he stands up and he takes a stand and he makes this great speech. Of course, it doesn't last long, right? So who's ever popular in the Bible, it seems like often they do the wrong thing. So in this case, the popular people, they decide, this is not for us. So a little bit later, the men who had gone up with them, they said, we are not able to go up against this people, for they are too strong. So they give this bad report. Into 14, we read part of this passage. I'll just kind of paraphrase here. So the people are upset at this point. They're angry. They say, hey, let's just go back to Egypt. This guy, he's not leading us to the right place. We're all going to die here. We might as well go back to some place we can at least eat. So they're talking about stoning Moses and going back to the place they came from, just like it was before. So Caleb has this one more little section here in verse 20. It says, actually, he's just before this. Moses and Joshua both kind of come to the rescue, and they say, not only can we take this land, but God will deliver it into our hands. So they show their faithfulness in this passage. They said, don't rebel against God, that God will bring us into this land. So you'd think that would win the day, but it certainly didn't. So faithful men and women don't always get what's done that should be done. So look at verse 20. Numbers 14, verse 20. The Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word, but indeed as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land where I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurn me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit, has fully followed me. I will bring him into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. So what happens after here is the children of Israel go into the land. Of course, they do take over the land, and there's only 2 guys out of these 12 who make it. And it is Caleb and Joshua, right? Joshua leads them. Caleb is kind of an afterthought. He's not mentioned a whole lot, but he is mentioned a few times in Judges and elsewhere as being faithful. So he goes to the land. Joshua gives him the land. He has to go fight for it. He does fight for it. Everything that's said about Caleb is good. So it's really a great reference for a man of God. So just looking at Caleb, he was faithful. So you think about him as a servant, okay? He's got a servant's heart. He's faithful. That's the most important thing. The most important thing about being a servant is being faithful. So if you're a double-edged person, you're like, think about Gehazi, who was the servant of Elisha. He tells him what to do and he does the opposite. That's the worst thing about being a servant. So we don't want to do that. We want to be the servant who's faithful. Caleb was a servant to Moses, but he was confident, right? He actually was confident in his faithfulness, yet he was humble. He was a servant with his life. He was courageous because he was unpopular, and that's very important for us. And he actually volunteered to go in and lead. We can do it. And you can just see him. Hey, I'll be the first one out there, guys. We can do it. So that's a great example for us. As I started looking into this, I stumbled across the word bondservant. In the Bible, the word servant generally means the word slave. So we tend to think slave very negatively in our English sense and in our American history. But in the biblical history, slave is a very normal part of life. In the Roman world, a third of the people were slaves. Like a lot of people were slaves. Some were good, some were bad. Some masters were good, some were bad. So it's a very different world. But there's a word called bondservant, which is different. So I had to look this up, and I had to dig a little bit because I couldn't figure it out. But I think the thought is that a bondservant is voluntary. So if you're a slave, you're in the wrong place in the wrong time. So you lose a war, or you were born into slavery, you're a slave for good, and you're stuck. A bondservant's different. That's somebody who willingly decides that they want to serve somebody. All right, they're going to be in bondage or servitude for life to a master. So the whole issue is voluntary. I thought that's very interesting. There's a lot of uses of bondservant in the New Testament. So Paul, in many places, he says, "I am a bondservant of Jesus Christ." So this is his choice, right? So we're not slaves to sin anymore. We want to be slaves to righteousness. We're still slaves in a sense, in a spiritual sense, but we have freedom to choose slavery to Christ. That's interesting. So a bondservant has freedom to choose, and that's what we do. A bondservant of Christ is, of course, should be humble, should be all about their master, shouldn't be about themselves. So you think about some other great examples of servants in the Bible. They were all people who served others and really had no thought for themselves. So we'll look up the one passage here in Philippians 2. This is giving Jesus as an example. Philippians 2, verse 5. "Have this attitude in yourselves which was also in Christ Jesus, who although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." So even Jesus was a bondservant, it says. Bondservant of Jesus is, or of any master, is selfless. He puts others first. It's just not the nature of a bondservant to say, "Hey, you get out of the way. I'm gonna go first," right? That's just not what any slave would do. But a bondservant chooses not to do that. By choice, they don't do that. Bondservant of Christ seeks to serve and to do his will. It's just some of you have been to a restaurant where you go and you might have a waiter or waitress, and they just do the best job in the whole world, and they just present things, and they just make things. They make you happy. They want to serve you, and some do it out of maybe for the tip you're going to get, but other people, they do it out of the goodness of their nature. I mean, some people actually do that, and people like me have to keep training ourselves because we don't do it naturally. I don't know which one you are, but I know for me it does not come naturally at all, so I have to keep reminding myself that I need to be a servant. So that's partly the reason for this talk. The bondservant of Christ magnifies Jesus as Lord of all. In our case as Christians, that's our job, is to magnify Christ. That was a great picture, isn't it? Sometimes you find these great pictures and you think, man, that's a good one. The bondservant of Christ serves without praise or present reward. So you think about the passage in the Gospels where Jesus talked about the one parable, and they're just supposed to say, "Hey, I just did what I was supposed to do. I don't need any more praise than that. That's all it's about." So that's one of the passages in the Gospels. A bondservant of Christ is voluntary. It's permanent. It's all about devotion and subjection. So if you want to volunteer to be a bondservant, you're not going to be the boss. That's just the way it is. If you volunteer to be the bondservant, there's always a boss above you. And your job is to support the boss, to do what the boss wants, to do his will. Interesting what Americans do with our time as far as our volunteering, our service. According to research, 15% of Americans spend some amount of time on volunteering. But I guess there's a big split. Those who do spend a lot of time. All right, so perhaps you're one of those that spends a big chunk of your time. Those who spend a big chunk spend over 2 hours a day volunteering in some sort. Could be for the church, could be for whatever, something for other people. It's not for yourself. I thought it was kind of interesting. 2 hours, 15 minutes a day. Can you imagine that? I don't do that. I don't know how many people do that, but somebody says a lot of people do, so it must be true. It was on the internet. This seems probably more true, that women are more likely to be volunteers than men. Often you see more women at churches than men. A lot of men just don't hold up their end of the bargain. So it's up to men to stand up, right? Do our job. Be a servant. So women are naturally better than that, perhaps, than men. And interesting, as far as volunteering, religious people are only slightly more inclined or more used to volunteering. So you might think it would be 10 to 1. It's not at all. You know, it's kind of like divorce. You might expect Christians to be divorced a lot less than the rest of the world. It's not so much. So Christians and the church, really, we blend into the world much more than we should. So doing acts of service, there's a lot of different things anyone can do. Just open your eyes, look, and imagine, what could you do? If I'm not doing what I'm usually doing that maybe I shouldn't do, what could I be doing? All kinds of things. We don't have to wash feet. It's a good thing if we do, but it's not like we have to do one great thing. A lot of little things are things that anybody can do here. Gandhi said this. He said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. That was a good quote. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So Jesus was our example, not just in washing of feet, but everything he did. So wherever he went, he lived a life of, how can I help you? You know, people would come before him and they're blind, and he'd say, what do you want me to do for you? Well, everyone else, it might be kind of obvious, but maybe it's not obvious. Maybe their answer shouldn't have been their sight. Maybe it should have been something else. But if we were that blind person, we'd probably have that same answer. You know, Lord, I want to receive my sight. And whatever people came to him, he was there with an answer. He was there to help them. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Then we have Jesus and John saying, anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me and must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. That's our mission. As servants of God, as bondservants, our mission is to be servants of Jesus Christ. That's our life ambition. If we can do that, we're good. That's really all we got to do. It's not that simple, but that's the overriding thing. Galatians says, you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. So we're born free, but we're slaves to our master. We choose whether the master is sin or Jesus. That's our choice. But bondservants choose Jesus. We choose that as our choice. So here's 5 simple ways I was thinking that we can develop a servant's heart. And this is more advice for myself again. We need to be deeply humble and empty of self. And I know that's better, maybe easier said than done. We need to be selfless and naturally put others first. We need to seek and to serve Jesus and to do his will. He is our master. We need to magnify our master over our own interests. So, you know, if we're called to do something and we don't do it, that's not a good thing. So we have to answer the call for what we're called for. And then voluntarily serve with absolute devotion. So just a reminder that our service is voluntary. I mean, anybody can opt out of here anytime you want to. Go your own way and do what you want. That's our life. That's our Creator gave us that free choice. But with that freedom comes the choice to serve. So that's what we want to do, is say, hey, here am I, send me. So I think the lesson to me, and maybe to you, is we want to live a life of how can I help? How can I help you? Right? Anybody, how can I help you? You need any help? How can I help? And I think the best part about it is to ask that question before you're asked. So that's why I loved about what Brian did last week with the basement. He did that before he was asked. Nobody was here to ask him, so it was obvious. He kind of saw the need and took care of it. But sometimes you'll see people do things before you ask them. Like, you know what needs to be done, and they actually do it before you ask. Like, I come across that at work. I come across that at home different times. It's a great thing. I mean, we all love that when someone else does that. So why don't we do that to other people? I mean, that's I think, that's a lesson for us to do, to serve even before we're asked. Philippians, the first 5 verses says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus." That's the summary of what we should be. Ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Any situation, any decision, wherever we are, what would Jesus do? So, final verse here, Galatians, a famous verse we know. Paul says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. In the life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." Now with that, I'm going to show you a little clip of a video and let this serve as our next hymn. And please excuse the man in white.
I know of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry, all who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars of night, I will make their darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send? Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold to